The African Union has recently been championing the agenda of reparations, which is focusing on addressing historical injustices. Today on the People's Space podcast, we will be delving and we will be endeavoring to unpack this concept of reparations and, of course, examining one of the interesting facets that is closely linked to this important topic, which is the global financial architecture. And, of course, we will be examining it from the context of reparations. The name is Wenson Mavoro, and welcome to your People's Space podcast. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritties of our conversation, allow me to remind you that the opportunity to win some fantastic prizes is still very much valid and waiting for you to take action. All you simply have to do is click that like button on the Center for Trade Policy and Development page on social media platforms such as YouTube and Facebook, and CTPD Zambia on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And you do stand a chance of winning these fantastic prizes that range from t-shirts, hoodies, mug cups, caps, shirts, and of course, exciting memorabilia that you cannot afford to miss out on. All you simply have to do is make sure that you get interactive on those platforms. If your comment garners more reactions and traction, then you are the person that we are looking for. Now, I'm very much excited, and you can tell from my enthusiasm because of the person that I'm hosting today. You know, I like to regard people that come from the country where she emanates as brothers and sisters from another mother, because we have so much similarities than we have differences. In some instances, I've been mistaken to be a person that comes from the country where she comes from. And this country, ladies and gentlemen, is no other than the powerhouse or the headquarters of East Africa. I can say that I won't be in trouble. She's the one that will be in trouble. But you can guess what that country is. Of course, I'm joined by Catherine Mithia, all the way from the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development, AFRODAD. She is the Policy and Advocacy Officer for Sovereign Debt Management. Catherine, jambo.
Asalama, jambo.
Karibu.
Asante, karibu. It depends. It depends.
Karibu means what?
Karibu,
so if you say jambo,
welcome.
jambo, karibu, welcome.
Yes.
Okay.
No, so, jambo, salama.
Jambo, salama.
Ndio.
Okay.
And then karibu, welcome.
So you see that, Zambia and Kenya is basically one country. Eh?
Yes.
Okay. So Catherine, I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you.
And, it's great to just have an opportunity to interact with, obviously, people from AFRODAD. You guys are doing an amazing job with regards, shaping important discourse and policy surrounding debt management in Africa. I just needed to get that out of the way. In case nobody ever said this, please go to your boss, set up an appointment and say, Wenson sent me with an important message. He said, good job.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
We appreciate it.
Okay. So before we get into unpacking what the concept of reparation is all about, Catherine, people would first of all just like to know a little bit about you, because now they're excited. She's from Kenya. Oh, Nairobi. Okay. And, when you talk about Kenya, obviously what comes into mind is Nairobi. And that song, I've forgotten the title, but I'll remind you as we go in our conversation. There was a famous song that we used to dance to in Zambia a lot from Kenya.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll
please remember.
I'll tell you that one as we go with the conversation. So just briefly tell us a little bit about yourself outside work.
Okay. So yeah, my name is Catherine Mithia. Besides working for AFRODAD, also a mom of one. I also recently launched.
Only?
Yes.
Okay.
For now, until circumstances change, but we are doing well right now. I'm also recently a bike enthusiast. I learned how to ride a motorcycle. So yes, so that is my thing right now. And I hope one day when you come to Nairobi, you'll be the first person I'm giving a ride.
In fact, I'll call you. You come and pick me up from the airport on a bike.
Yes, please. So besides work, that is me right now. I also, I'm a garden. I like gardening. I now have my own small space. I'm trying different things. I did get a really nice pumpkin patch. I think I should have showed you a photo if I knew. Yeah, I should. I actually have a photo, so I'll show you something.
Okay, that's wonderful.
So yes, in
We
a
will actually
nutshell,
show that picture, by the way, so
we
you get to
should
see.
definitely. It was huge. I'm so proud. I'm so proud. But yes, that is me.
Okay.
Yeah, outside AFRODAD. Yeah.
That's very interesting, and I can confidently, without shame, say that at least there's one thing that you can teach me among the many things that I can learn from you is riding a bike. You know, this is something that I've never done. You know,
But
and
no promises.
okay,
I'm still a learner.
as well.
Yes.
But I mean, the mere fact that you can ride means you're better than me. Anyway,
Yeah.
let's get right into our conversation. A very, very exciting conversation that I'm looking forward to, Catherine. But before we start examining important areas of this conversation, what are some of the critical, or first of all, it would be beneficial to understand, first of all, what really reparations are all about, and what are some of the key components of reparations?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Winston. So yeah, like you rightly said, African Union this year decided to make the theme of reparations, and it's justice for Africa and people of African diaspora on reparations. And this is a theme that it is not new to the African Union, or not even within the African context. I think during when African Union was formed in 1963, this was very high on the agenda now that countries were coming from, gaining independence. And they really wanted to explore, what it would feel like getting back what they've already sort of lost from the colonial process that they had just started coming out of. So it was really high on the African Union agenda during its formation. And in 1993, actually, they did hold a conference on reparations, which led to it's called the Abuja Declaration, which basically was to show that Africa is owed a moral debt, or a debt in how they were treated, and they needed in some sort of reparations apology, if not the financial compensation in what they went through. And this is a theme that has continued in different ways. Even in 2022, the government of Ghana really came out strong to continue with this, push or ask for reparations. And that led also to what is now referred to as the Accra Declaration, which now also sort of expanded the theme of what reparations would look like in the African context, where it's about also healing, right? I think we've seen even with what slavery did, and in Africans that were expatriated to other countries against their will, the injustices that they've suffered because of racism, and they are still trying to overcome that, and that has some sort of trauma behind the injustices of racism and all that. So there's supposed to be also, I think, from the conference to a recognition that we need to heal from all these injustices. So Ghana has actually been a very strong proponent for reparations, and that is why I think it was last year during the 37th Assembly of the African Union Heads of State Ordinary Assembly, they did decide now officially to make 2025 as the theme of reparations for Africa, not only Africa, but also people of African descent, or rather Africans in the diaspora. So reparations, it has different lenses, right? And definitions, right? There's of course the financial compensation. We've seen, like for example, Germany paid reparations to the victims of the Holocaust. We've seen also in countries like Namibia recently, where they did accept that there was some injustices to the Namibian people, and they have, agreed to. They've actually offered an apology, and they're willing to put some, financial, returns or compensation towards those injustices. So it really depends how you want to frame it. There's also reparations in terms of offering apologies and recognizing that an injustice was actually taking place. So within the African Union context, they want to broaden this theme beyond, financial compensation. It is also recognizing how, the challenges of, for example, slavery, the transatlantic slavery, slave trade, and also colonialism that came after that. Even now, with the aspect of neocolonialism, how that has continued to put African countries in a very difficult position, not only in their economic dispensation, but also in their cultural, cultural setup within the global system. So I think with the African Union theme, it's going beyond just the financial compensation. It's also recognizing the injustices of this system that came with the colonialism, slave trade, and all that, and that we now really deserve reparations in terms of either financial compensation, recognition, or even just transformation of those systems that continue to put us in that places of how do I put it? Or we are not still enjoying the benefits of a global system that has really evolved over the years or since even the slave trade, but we still find ourselves in those injustices, facing injustices.
I love the fact that, you've mentioned that the theme transcends the monetary benefit, which has often been the focus of so many people. And the classic example I love is Namibia. I call it classic because, social media was ablaze with this subject of reparations because part of the reparations that the German government offered was the, historical, the heritage artifacts, which were brought back to Namibia. A lot of Namibians went on social media and say, we don't need bones. What can we do with bones? Build a school, build houses, build hospitals, build all these things. When we discuss the subject of reparations, Catherine, from your perspective, how important is it for Africans to also move beyond just looking at it from a financial gain? Or maybe is a financial gain all that we need as African countries when we discuss reparations?
I think in the context of even how the African Union is trying to frame it, for example, Haiti did pay reparations, or they were forced to pay some amount to the former colonial masters in order to get independence, right? It is not, and even after that, they were not able to benefit from what the system had already been put in by the former colonial masters, right? So it is defining in the context of reparations right now for Africa. It is to recognize that there is a system that was actually put place that continues to disadvantage us in a way that financial compensation cannot be enough. We are the ones actually losing, or we've lost over the years and continue to lose because of that system. And I like how you introduced the segment in reparations vis-a-vis the global financial architecture, because that is where we feel if we were to talk about reparations, we will be able to benefit beyond the financial compensation. So first of all, African countries, besides losing, facing this extractivism, first from, the transatlantic slave trade, because they were, taken to provide labor in plantations far from their homes. There was also during colonialism, where colonial governments actually borrowed to produce, to develop infrastructure that helped to extract raw materials from these colonies. And after even the countries got their independence, they were, because these systems were, or rather the infrastructure was designed to help export or to remove materials from the continent.
It's just merely extraction.
It was extraction.
No processing.
There's no processing. And therefore, we had now to go back, right, to say we need support in order to develop ourselves, because when they were taking the resources, it's them that were getting the money. So we were left, almost bare, right? So they developed a system where we had to develop, or rather to depend on them in order to gain our economic sovereignty. However, that was not the case. It has not been the case for a very long time. And therefore, when we talk about the global financial architecture, is to say that the systems that were developed during slavery, after slavery, during the colonial period, and after post, it was not meant to serve us, does not continue to serve us, and therefore we are the ones losing in terms of our resources, right? So they owe us for what they've taken from us. That is the kind of reparations we need. And it's supposed to, the way it can come about is through the reform, the global reform architecture reforms, where these systems are now dismantled to provide a better system of economic governance, where it's equal, it's fair. African countries have a say. We can manage our own resources. That is the kind of system that we want, and where we can feel we get complete reparations or return from what we have lost over the years.
I'll give you the liberty to also just, if there's anything that you've left out when it comes to, because I feel the point that you've just hammered on there, Catherine, is very important.
Yeah.
When we talk about reforming the global financial architecture as the foundation for us to not only begin to reap the benefits of reparations, but building a sustainable future for ourselves as a people. Another aspect that is identified to have perpetuated the injustices that justify reparations is the issue of neocolonialism. But to that, my question again is, as Africans, ever since independence, Zambia is over 56 years old, over 57 years old, after independence, So are other African countries which are a whole lot older. Talk about Ghana and these others. But my question is, we reached a point where we identified a system that is designed to keep us limited in a certain position. One then wonders, why haven't we done something to be able to read or wean ourselves from this system that is designed to keep us oppressed in a certain way? Which again brings me back to the issue of the global financial architecture. Could it be that the global financial architecture itself does not allow Africa to be able to rise above this system, despite realizing and recognizing the injustices of the system?
I think when they say, for example, if you look at the context of debt, right? It is not a mistake that African countries are still, like you're saying, after 60 years of independence, our main form of developed finance, a big chunk of it is from debt. Why? Because it benefits those former colonial governments in terms of how they design the systems. They're the ones providing, for example, capital. They have put systems in such a way we are the ones providing raw materials, and they provide the high value goods, right? Meaning we never get to a point where we are earning enough domestically, right? Because that is how you develop a country, through trade, right? You have to earn enough to be able to have enough for your development aspirations, right? So if you're the ones producing the raw materials and importing, for example, the finished products, it will not allow you to have enough revenue to support your economic growth. You'll always be in this deficit position, right? And in being that deficit position has led us now to have this model of borrowing for development financing agendas. So if that is not a mistake, it is systematic. I don't like recently we did have a tribunal in Malawi just this week. And we were the tribunal is about bringing charges against the IMF and their policies of conditionalities, where they loan with conditions attached to them. For example, you have to decrease social sector spending for you to be able to repay your debt, or you are forced to increase taxes in regressive, or rather increase your regressive taxes in order to increase your revenue basis. But we have seen over the years, since the adoption of these policies, it has not worked for African countries. And therefore, in this tribunal where we are giving charges against the IMF, even after in being part of Africa's development agenda, they have been continually putting us in this debt trap, right? That is not a mistake. It is a system designed to put us at the bottom of the value of the global value chain, where we are always producers and not and they're not the ones producing rather the finished products to earn us enough revenue for our countries. So therefore, it is a system designed to keep us that way, to benefit those countries, as it was when they started it, those years in the colonial period and post-colonial period, where we call it neo-colonialism, through these policies of, for example, conditionalities. So I think it is for us, it's now to recognize that as much as we are putting systems in place, for example, in Zambia, you're talking about regulatory. You have now a Public Financial Management Act that is very robust in your public debt management aspects, but still you have to contend with these other aspects of trade, of how the loans, the conditions of borrowing that still keep you in that debt trap. So you'll not be able to grow until that system is completely dismantled. So I think in that regard, it's not that we don't recognize, but until there's a complete reform, and the reform that has been happening has not been to support African countries to get out of the debt trap, right? So, for example, if you look at the debt restructuring initiatives that have been happening to provide debt relief for African countries, if you look at the 2000s, there was the highly indebted poor countries initiative, where countries, debt was cancelled. But a few years later, all those countries that actually, over 30 countries that received relief,
they were right back
to debt. Why? Because first, the kind of loans that they were now getting into became more expensive. And this is a bias that has been created to say that lending to African countries is risky, and therefore they have to borrow at higher risks, higher interests.
Is there even evidence? Is there empirical evidence, by the way, to justify that same notion?
That
African countries,
they do,
are a huge risk. So you have to come up with ridiculous.
So the evidence is usually, I mean, if you look at, so in the 2000s, after or mid 2007, 2008, after the financial crisis, and then African countries now got into the international markets, where they moved more from the traditional lenders, like bilateral creditors or multilateral creditors, which are the international financial institutions, and they moved to private creditors. At that point, African countries had also undergone a lot of political unrest in many countries, civil unrests. So there was that perception that there's a risk because of those, internal situations that could put or were perceived to be risky to lend to African countries. And it's something that is still continuing. And now that with different changes, like the climatic changes, you had the Ebola episode, like health pandemics and all that. So there's still that perception that African countries are risky. And like I like that, yeah, you've asked that, because it is like, for example, during COVID, it's not something you brought on yourself. It's something that affected the world.
Yeah.
So why should we be punished because of that? Even during climatic shocks like the cyclones and floods, it is not something that you expect. But why are you being penalized because of such? So I think, it's the evidence that they produce to say that we are at risk is not fair, and it's not. It cannot be used as a reason for us to be charged high interest rates compared to, counterpart countries in the global north, so to say. So I think in that way, again, we can see the injustices of this system that was not designed for us, but mostly to exploit us.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love the fact that, you've brought on the subject of debt. How does emphasis, on reparations speak to this huge problem that currently shackles so many African countries?
I think, like I mentioned, if you look at how debt governance or the debt architecture, the players within that system. So just a general overview for the actors within the debt system. So you have the international financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. You have credit rating agencies, which actually determine how countries can borrow, especially if it's commercial debt. You have your international financial institutions. You have the credit rating agencies. Of course, you have your central bank institutions. Of course, because of the domestic debt aspect of it. So all these actors within the global financial architecture, they do determine a lot in the type of debt that a country borrows, especially for Africa, the kind of rate, the maturity period, the conditions that go into that, the debt itself. And therefore, if we have already seen that the players are the same ones that designed it to put us in that cycle of indebtedness, then that is a problem and needs to be addressed. So until that system is relooked, we'll always be in a debt trap. So for us, reparations is to say we have lost already a lot from this cycle of dependency and cycle of debt trap. Even if you look at the the official, there's that debate of official development assistance, the aid that we have been receiving, right? I want to imagine if you do a study right now to determine whether us not receiving aid right now in the next 5 years, if it's still not going to put us in that system of debt, right? Because if it was supposed to help us, why are we borrowing again, right? So this issue of debt is making us even lose more money compared to what we are supposed to be earning from a system that is taking away from us. So that needs to be relooked very critically. Yeah.
You are watching the People Space podcast, and obviously we are looking at the very important subject of reparations that has currently gained prominence within the corridors of the African Union, with emphasis for seeking justice or reparations for the injustices that were committed in the past. When it comes to some of the things that Catherine Mithia, who is my guest, has highlighted. And of course, we are looking at the global financial architecture itself, examining whether in its current format does support the economic independence of Africa that has for over 50 years enjoyed political independence. We'll be back shortly with more. Welcome back to the People Space podcast with me, Wenson Mavoro. My guest today is Catherine Mithia, all the way from Kenya, and we are looking at the subject of reparations within the context of the reformation of the global financial architecture. Now, Catherine is from the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development, known to many as AFRODAD. There, she is the Policy and Advocacy Officer for Sovereign Debt Management. And just a reminder, those of you that are keen followers of the People Space podcast, you can stand a chance to get some rewards, win yourself some amazing, fantastic prizes, ranging from t-shirt, hoodies, mug cups, and exciting other accessories that are branded the People's Space podcast. All you simply have to do is be interactive on those platforms. Remember, all you simply need to do is just comment or tag your friends on some of these important episodes that you may find interesting. And by so doing, if your comment garners enough tractions and reactions, you might be that lucky winner that will receive these amazing prizes. Catherine, one of the things that a lot of people may not know about you, despite being an interesting individual, is that you've worked in the government before. And I don't know how it is in Kenya, but in Zambia, there's this perception about people that have worked in government before that they have a certain attitude towards work and approach when it comes to work. So before we get right into, continuing where we left off before the break, how did you make the transition from the public service to the CSO sector?
Yeah. I think, based on my background, educational background, I'd done my bachelor's in economics, and then I followed up with a master's in public policy. So I think because I used to work in the judiciary of Kenya, and I felt a bit limited in the way I could exploit or use my educational background. And prior to that, I'd actually been in the space in economic justice. I had worked as an intern actually in one of the civil society organizations in Kenya, and I developed an interest in what not necessarily debt. My work around there was around illicit financial flows and how actually it's affecting African countries. I think at that time it was when the Thabo Mbeki panel report had come out around in 2015. And it was just shocking to hear how much Africa is losing in illicit financial flows. So I think I developed my interest to just understanding, besides issues of, of course, illicit financial flows, but just economic justice as a whole and how African countries are not benefiting from, their resources. For example, there's that, questions of underdevelopment, like we were discussing, despite 60 years of independence. Yeah. So when I got the opportunity at AFRODAD, it was a no-brainer that I needed to, just take a chance and continue with what I had started to do back in the days.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Let's now talk about another interesting component that we cannot ignore when we talk about the issue of reparations. This is the diaspora. Currently, we've seen reports from countries like Nigeria that have got a huge diaspora. Countries like Ghana. I think Kenya also is raking in quite some good revenues from the diaspora, helping to develop the local economy, fostering the FDI. How important is the diaspora when it comes to advancing the agenda of reparations?
Yeah, I think maybe to look at it in another way, besides what you've already explained, is that in the context of, for example, slavery, where Africans were taken out of their homelands to these countries where they were used, actually exploited against their will, and through their labor, it was used to develop those countries. You can see then, and even after that, they still had to endure injustices, for example, segregation, racism. There's inequalities in the economic opportunities. If you look maybe for example in America, so if you look at Africans in diaspora in that sense and how they've been affected because of the issues of slavery, which has been, because of the same colonial masters that are benefiting from, not only their sweat, their labor, and all that, but they're still the ones benefiting, at least in Africa, from what they had already started. Is to say that whether in Africa or in the diaspora, Africans has been experiencing a lot of, injustices against their will, right? They still are the ones, for how do I put it? They're still the ones, even right now, have to struggle a lot to get even the basic, rights. They have to fight more than what even in the diaspora, the local have to, or even the citizens, from those countries have to go through to enjoy the same rights. So I think for us, it is that unity. I think Africans in diaspora, it's recognizing that we are facing the same, whether you're in there or in Africa, and it's because of this system that was created to against us, basically. So it is now for us to come together and say enough is enough, right? No more racism. We have already endured enough suffering to develop systems that are not even benefiting us. So enough is enough. So it's either we get our due, either recognition or participate equally in this system. And I think even for AFRODAD, we have a slogan like Africa rule makers and not rule takers. Yeah, it is about time to be.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's about time for us to be part of the global decision making, because we cannot continue to suffer for something that we are already suffering because of that system. So I think with the Africans in the diaspora, they can relate to this issue of reparations because it did affect them. And I think even I think I read of a case in as early as in the 1700s in America, where there was actually a case lodged. Someone was demanding reparations for being enslaved. I think her name was Belinda or something. But that was the first actual case of reparations, demanding reparations because of the slavery. So seeing that you're still experiencing the injustices because of that, I think over 100 years later, or 400 years later, in the case of Africans in the diaspora, it's about time that things change. Yeah.
Interesting. When we talk about obviously the bigger problem that Africa is dealing with, even as we advocate and champion the idea of reparations, is debt. It brings to mind, efforts being made to be able to not only improve existing debt when it comes to management, but like you explained earlier on, Catherine, changing our approach, developing policies that at the end of the day put us in a position where we don't fall back in the cycle. Now, when you look at conventions such as the UN Framework Convention on Debt, are these enough? Do they speak to the reality of really bringing us to that place where we can simply say, you know what? We will not go back in this debt trap. Once we're out, we're out. Going forward, this is how we are going to be.
Yeah. So to just understand also on the context of debt, and when we refer to the global financial architecture, it is how it is operating now. It is not a rule-based system, right? It's a cabal of countries that make. It's a rule-based in a sense that it does not incorporate all the actors, right? It's a cabal of rich countries who have already benefited at the back of Africans at their resources, making the rules that are continuing to segregate us, right? So when you're making a case for the UN, having a framework convention on debt is to say that it is having a fair rule-based system where every country has an equal vote, because that is what the UN is. Any decision has to be equally voted on. So UN is the only democratic space where issues of, for example, economic governance can be fair, can be equitable, and move away from this cabal of rich countries that make decisions for a few. I mean, for the entire global system where they're the ones benefiting the most. So the case for a UN Framework Convention is just to say that the rules have to change. It has to be issues on debt, the debt architecture, the players in the debt architecture, and how debt is being contracted has to be based on a fair rules. It has to be equitable. It has to even consider the human rights. Why should debt be a cause of so like currently in the African context, we have over 34 African countries spending more on debt servicing than health. Meaning you're having dilapidated health institutions, and access to medicine is a challenge. At least in my country, Kenya, it is an ongoing story, right? We went to a health facility, there was more medicine, or you couldn't find a doctor, or they're understaffed, right? And when you have countries spending more on debt servicing than health, then that is a challenge, right? So where debt is supposed to be for development purposes and not supposed to favor the interest of the creditors, then you see that is a flawed system, right? And therefore, this process of a UN Framework Convention, it's important because it means debt decisions are made in a responsible way. It is equitable, it is fair, but also considers human rights. So for AFRODAD, we've been championing for this UN Framework Convention, and through the Financing for Development process, which it is a process that has been going on since 2002, which led to, for example, the Monterey Consensus, the Addis Ababa Agenda Declaration, which was in 2015, and prior to that, there was another declaration. And all these are just processes that have been developed to ensure that development financing in the global context is supposed to serve the interest of countries in a more equitable way. So in the fourth Financing for Development process, it is a follow-up of the Addis Ababa Agenda Declaration in 2015, where the main agenda was actually the reform of the global financial architecture as part of the main asks. And I think in the opening session in 2024, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, stressed this, that there needs to be a reform of the financial architecture that is fit for developing countries, so that they can be able to actually achieve economic transformation. Yeah, so on the UN Framework Convention on Debt, it is a process that we have been championing as AFRODAD. Like I was mentioning, through the Financing for Development process that has been going on since last year in July. And it's supposed to lead to a conference sometime next week in Sevilla, Spain, the fourth Financing for Development conference. And just recently, they released the final outcome document that will be adopted in the main conference. That just explains the different thematic areas of development financing, from debt, international cooperation, taxation, trade. So for AFRODAD, for us, our main goal was to push for an intergovernmental process that will establish the UN Framework Convention on Debt, similar to what you've heard about the tax convention. So with the debt convention, it's just supposed to be a framework addressing proper debt contraction and debt governance and towards that the reform of what is actually we are experiencing as forms of the global financial architecture. So I think during that outcome document, if you look at under the debt and sustainability, there's a text that has been included, which for us, we feel it is a win, a small win, because it actually now an intergovernmental process can actually begin towards this debt convention. And this is just a beginning of a very radical change that we can see now in how debt contraction can be done in a more fair, more equitable, and it can also address those issues like I was just talking about earlier, issues of interest rates, how we contract debt. It should be in a manner that does not continue to keep us in more debt, right? When you have, for example, issues of lending, creditors, they should be able to lend responsibly. For example, in international financial institutions like the IMF, why put conditionalities in a country that is still trying to repay its debt? It's trying to develop its economies, but you're putting regressive policy conditionalities that does not actually lift them out from the debt situation. It will also address issues of debt restructuring. For example, in Zambia here, under the G20 Common Framework, where you've faced a lot of challenges in terms of creditor coordination. The process has been very lengthy, very slow. And out of all that, still, you've not received complete relief under this debt restructuring process. So this framework convention will be able to address all that in a very holistic way. The challenge is that I just want to point it out, the way it has been framed, it is not in a way that is binding, which is, it is important that for it to be binding so that all the actors are able to participate in a fair way. And they do not operate outside such a framework, right? So the way it is structured right now, and this is under paragraph 50F, it is an intergovernmental process with the view of recommending it. So that does not make it a binding process. And just something also to point out is that when these negotiations were going for the text and how it was going to be adopted, at the very last minute, we had countries such as the UK and even the European Union, blocking a binding process. So this also takes us back to what you're calling about these institutions or countries that designed a system that they want it to continue to benefit them, right? Because why would you block a process that's supposed to be fair or equitable, or promote responsible lending or responsible borrowing? Why would you block such a process? So I think as it is right now, it is not an entirely a complete win, but it's a start. It affirms our advocacy efforts as civil society, as AFRODAD, or even as citizens who are the ones who are affected by high debt levels in their countries. It is a start to something that can be better, can be more fairer, and it can actually make that change in the system that is unfit for purpose, for at least in the African context.
Unfortunately, Catherine, time is not our best ally, but we have to wrap up our conversation. And what I would like you to close with is your final words to the policymakers across the African continent when we talk about championing this idea of reparations. Well,
I think I would say that reparations is not a new idea. It's just that for Africans, it has been blocked because it is a threat. and I want to confidently say that it's a threat. It's viewed as a threat by the same, designers of this system, because they still want to continue in the extractivism, in the dominance, in the decision making. So it's about time we've paid our dues. If that was the intention, I think we have already paid our dues. And African leaders or policymakers should now recognize that reparations will only come if we are able to, achieve economic sovereignty away from this system, right? And if it is that, I think that is now the kind of reparations we should be demanding. We cannot continue to be economic dependent on such on those countries. We cannot continue to lose our resources while they continue to benefit. It is about time that the system changes. And if that is what reparations mean, then that would be my message to policymakers.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for coming through to the Paper Space podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. So there you have it. We've been talking the subject of reparations and, of course, looking as well at reforming the global financial architecture within the context of our theme. And for me, I think one of the most important things that Catherine has mentioned is the issue of sovereignty. We cannot achieve economic sovereignty not until we begin to really, really, really understand and pursue this concept of reparations in the right way that it is supposed to be pursued. But most importantly, for me, is the issue of coming to a place where we do not only introspect as Africans, but we begin to actually change our mental, or a paradigm shift, as others would call it, of not only continue to wallow in this cycle of dependence, as Catherine again mentioned, most importantly, but we need people that will begin to break the cycle of dependence. And only then can we get to a place of understanding even the kind of reparations themselves that we seek as Africans. But again, the biggest takeaway is economic sovereignty. Only then can we be in a place where, as Africa, we can have an equal stake when it comes to the global economic scene. The name is Winston Mavora. You've been watching the People Space podcast. Thank you for coming through. We will see you next time. But remember, you can be that lucky winner on the People Space podcast by simply interacting with us on the platforms YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and other social media platforms under the handle the Center for Trade Policy and Development on Facebook and YouTube, and CTPD Zambia on TikTok and Twitter. Once your comment garners more interactions or traction, you might be the luck winner that might just be picked and given the opportunity to receive the fantastic prizes that we have. The conversation continues. We will see you next time. Enjoy.